I don't really have, do I look like a guy with a plan? I think where I would like to start this, though, if anything, is you remember service support would walk the rows up and down of the call center?
Yeah. Yep.
Seeing if any agents needed help. And I remember I was doing that, and I saw, this was 10 years ago, man. I saw the Bane poster.
The Bane IMAX poster.
So I made note of that, and then you moved over to service support, and you happened to sit next to me, and I said something, and we just started talking Batman ever since. And you had mentioned that evening that, hey, look at me, I made a friend today. So yeah, the rest is history. It was Batman that originally got this conversation going, so it's kind of perfect that we're talking about this, and it's pretty much exactly 10 years later.
Wasn't that also just by the time too we were sitting there going like, man, I hear they're making a Gotham TV series. What's that going to, that's going to be exciting. And then I gave up after you did, and I didn't even last like a full 2 seasons.
I don't remember how long I made it. I made it a few episodes in. Those Fox shows, they have very long seasons. I couldn't make it the whole season, but I was always pretty concerned about just any sort of Fox live action. I feel like nothing from Fox, at least in terms of live action, has ever interested me since X-Files and Millennium. Ever since those 2 shows were gone, I've never really watched Fox except for animation. I still like their animation, but yeah, so I was very concerned when I heard that they're making this live action Gotham show that's starring Jim Gordon, and adding Harvey Bullock as his sidekick was actually an interesting choice. And I'm actually surprised that more Batman movies don't feature Harvey Bullock.
Yeah, right. Like I thought in this, for example, before we found out that guy was the commissioner, I was thinking like, oh, that's either going to be Harvey Bullock or like a stand-in for Harvey Bullock, and then it's like, oh no, that's the commissioner who's going to be dead in the next scene.
Yeah, I never really thought to talk much about it, but I feel like that's a very big omission, because there's so much you can do with the character, and you can really use him as a plot device to flesh out Gordon a lot more, which I'm surprised Nolan didn't do. I think he wanted to go with the Flash route, who's so much more black and white corrupt cop, whereas Bullock's a little more gray area.
Bullock's a nice bridge between Gordon and like the cops that are definitely on the take and like, not trusting any of the things that Batman's doing, because 1, he is a vigilante, and 2, he's going to put a stop to whatever the hell they're doing. So they obviously don't like him for that reason. But yeah, no, he's a nice bridge between those 2 sides of the GCPD.
I don't know, maybe future films. Obviously, there's more to come. I read your Letterboxd. I saw the rating, 4.5 out of 5. I think everyone has their own scale. For example, some of my other friends, we have a 10-star scale, no half stars. And they really rate an average movie at about a 7 out of 10. Whereas me, an average movie to me is a 5 or a 6. Like, I use the whole scale, and they're kind of like the people that anything under a 5 is a terrible movie. But what is your scale like?
I do agree with you. Of like, if I were officially a Rotten Tomatoes critic and I had to like give my review, and then they actually have to, let them know like, okay, is this a, rotten or fresh? Because there could be like essentially a thumbs in the middle review. And to me, I would look at it and go like, anything under a 2.5, which is essentially a 5, 5 out of 10. I would say is bad. The thing I have a hard time with, though, is I think we actually discussed this when I rewatched recently the extended cut of BVS, and I gave it like a 1.5. And you were like, oh God, that's like a half star. And to me, it's like, I so very rarely can watch something and go like, that is, a 1 out of 10, essentially, just based on like, you have to be failing at every single like, I'm seeing a boom mic in this shot. This guy is not even trying to act. Or like, at least if I watch like a Batman versus Superman, I look at it and go like, there's nothing wrong with the effects. Like the effects, obviously, like I'm gonna be sitting there going like, I don't like what they're being used for necessarily, but like, I don't look at this and go, oh, this looks like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie at the end with Zords fighting. Like, this looks terrible. Or like I look at it and I go like, Ben Affleck is doing a good job with terrible material. Amy Adams, I don't think is capable of like being a terrible actress. Like, she's giving terrible material to work with, but she's not embarrassing herself. Where if like everybody were on the level of like Jesse Eisenberg in that movie, and like the effects were really terrible and it was still the same terrible plot that it has, then I could sit there and go, all right, this is like, a half star out of whatever. Because like, if you really look at my Letterboxd, I maybe only have a couple things that I went half star on.
And that's kind of where I'm at with, this is why I would give Batman versus Superman a half star, is because I didn't enjoy it at all. And I have nothing to take away from it. It's like with at least Batman and Robin, which I would probably give a 1 star to 1.5 star review, is that I can at least be entertained by how bad it is. With Batman versus Superman, like, I'm not enjoying it, and I'm not even entertained by it. A movie with a boom mic popping in the corner of a shot or something, like, that's still entertaining.
You're gonna laugh at that.
Right. So, I can get something out of that. But, it's really those Armageddon, Transformers, Batman versus Superman. Like, those are all the bottom of the barrel. It's the lowest on your ranking is a 0.5 star, right?
Yeah. Ask this question, though. Like, Affleck, like I said, I mean, even if you go like, okay, I don't think he's that good in it, but I always look at a 0.5 star too. This is why I have a hard time actually giving him out, is going, could you see this in some way actually being worse than it is? So take out Affleck from that movie, at least sort of try, at least I think he's trying pretty hard with really terrible material. And if you just went, okay, we're going to take Affleck out, we're going to put in George Clooney circa Batman and Robin in this. And that's not even fair. Because like I said, I really love Clooney, but like, who's a considerably worse actor than like Ben Affleck tried that you can think of? Like, and I feel bad saying that because I do really like Ben Affleck, but like, you put somebody really, really terrible in that, it would be a worse movie than it already is.
But I think this leads us into a bit of a paradox, because if you put less of an actor in there, you might gain something out of the entertainment aspect of it. And therefore it turns up the charm on it a little bit. Like, George Clooney, he's a great actor.
Yeah.
And he was given a terrible script, and Batman and Robin's a widely panned movie, but I still find that far more entertaining than Batman versus Superman. And to me, it's because Ben Affleck did reasonably well with the terrible script that it just feels so flat. Again, I don't get anything out of that. So if they were to put Tommy Wiseau in, a bat suit and give him that script.
Well, that's a different level of entertainment. But like, I was trying to think of movies that I've given a really, really low scores to, and it just finally hit me of like, and this is somebody who was so bad in that role that I can't find any entertainment of it, but like Attack of the Clones level Hayden Christensen as Batman in that movie. Yeah. And I'd be looking at that going like, okay, this is worse than what we're actually already sitting through. But yeah, so I think we genuinely agree of like anything under a 5 or a 2.5 is like a thumbs down. And like, to me, honestly, I look at anything 3.5 and above essentially going like, I didn't waste my time with this, and like, I can probably still find stuff that I can like in like 2-star things. So for this, I'm genuinely at about a 9.
Let's just do the 5-star scale, since you've already rated it a 4.5 on Letterboxd. I would give this a 3.5. Slightly above average. But I agree with your scale. I got my money's worth. 3.5 or higher is something I got my money's worth. I'd say 2 to 3 is average to me. 2.5 to 3 is like in the center, whereas 2, it's still kind of average. But I'd say anything under a 2, it's definitely a waste of money. So yeah, this is definitely money well spent.
That's a hesitant 4.5, and I'm not sure that in years going forward, I'm going to still think, okay, maybe it's a 4 instead of a 4.5. The movie is too fucking long.
It's way too long. I mean, I guess we'll just get the elephant out of the room.
Yeah, let's go with the negatives first.
I think what drags it out is, you remember Drive with Ryan Gosling?
I just rewatched it less than a year ago.
Yes. So, they had those long shots of just music playing and him absorbing the scenery, if you will. He's
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. One of the things I love about that movie is just watching Brad Pitt drive around to like Joe Cocker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, there's times where it's necessary. Now, I feel like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's paced that way through the entire movie.
Yeah.
Whereas with Drive, it's similar to the Batman, but at least Drive is like under 2 hours, where it's like, okay, you can take time to do that, but there's so much crammed into the Batman that a lot of it seems unnecessary, and it really drags out the movie. And I'm curious how much shorter that movie would have been had they just kind of gotten to the point and stopped dragging it out with Nirvana's Something in the Way.
I would argue the entire like final act almost. I don't think the last act is bad. I just don't think it belongs 2 hours and 25 minutes into this movie that I already kind of figured has already wrapped up its story. To me, if the movie had ended with like them catching Riddler and the interrogation scene and then like movie over, I probably would have said 5 out of 5, because I loved all of the detective stuff. I was totally in, but then it just felt like somebody stepped in either in the script process, because I doubt it was reshot, even though they took a bunch of time off for COVID. So they may have had time to like restructure the movie while they were filming it. But just, it felt like that was a natural ending of the movie. And then somebody went ahead and stopped and said like, hold up, we need more punching and we need more action. And we can't really sell toys off of him being a detective. So we need a big, gigantic action set piece. Can we like flood a, Madison Square Garden type situation and just bunch of shooting, bunch of punching, bunch of people in peril. And we're just going to do an extra like 30-minute, like standard comic book movie action scene ending. And that's where I kind of just sat there and like, I've already been satisfied. And now you're giving me this entire extra thing that was just like, holy shit, I don't need this.
I agree.
It's a really good, like, disaster epic action scene. It wasn't bad, but it was just, if you fed me a really delicious burger after I just ate dinner, it's like, yeah, if you gave this to me tomorrow, great, but I don't need it right now.
The Riddler was already captured, so I didn't feel like it progressed the story a whole lot. They just had this like epilogue disaster for Batman to save a bunch of people.
Which, to be fair, does have the most important part of the entire movie, though, which is him understanding that he needs to be more than just a spooky, vengeful, monster that people are afraid of. Like, to actually give people hope, which I loved about that. But I thought to myself, I wish you'd found a way to tell that part of the story 45 minutes ago. Like, one of my favorite scenes of that entire movie is when they are kind of cleaning up, everything, and he's helping, that person onto a, gurneys they put on the helicopter or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they like really hold on to his hand, like wanting, they're going to be okay. And him just understanding like, oh, this is way more important than like terrorizing people. And I loved that. And that's why I have a hard time shitting on that third act entirely. But I'm going like, man, if you'd found a way to put that scene and keep the ending at like 2 hours and like 20 minutes into this movie, fantastic. But you're putting it way at the end here that we don't need.
That's one of the things that I had a beef with for the movie, is that it didn't know what it wanted to develop and it didn't know what it didn't want to develop. For example, it streamlined a lot of stuff like the Waynes getting killed and all of that. Like, we all know that. We've all seen it several times. So the movie decided to streamline all of that. The Joker's already in Arkham. All of this stuff that we kind of already know happened already. But Batman still doesn't realize that he's supposed to be a symbol. It doesn't know what it wants to develop, and it doesn't know what it wants the audience to already know. A similar thing I noticed was his relationship with Alfred. It's like, Alfred's like, you're going to get hurt. And Bruce is like, you're not my father, Alfred. This is year 1, year 0 conversation, not year 2. Or this is conversation for the Dark Knight Returns stuff, similar to what Michael Caine and Christian Bale went through in The Dark Knight Rises. This is not year 2 stuff. Why are we hearing this? It couldn't decide what it wanted to develop on and what it didn't want to develop on. And it just felt so uneven, because the first 25 minutes or so, I went in with an open mind, suspending disbelief, like I always try to do. And I was convinced, this could be the best Batman film yet. It's a hard thing to top, but I'm going to keep an open mind. And sure enough, everything was going great. And Bruce Wayne, Batman, gets into the Batcave. And I was like, ooh, this is an awesome Batcave. And then sure enough, in comes walking Alfred, and he opens his mouth, and it's all downhill from there. It's all of this dialogue that we've already heard before. There was some very unevenness throughout that movie.
I'd be very curious as to what his first year and a half or so has actually been like, though, because there's even that aspect in the Nolan movies, because that I just rewatched like the week before this came out. Alfred at first is sort of like, I don't know about this, and then he just keeps supporting him. And then once The Dark Knight Rises comes, he's all like, I'm not going to bury you. And it's like, hold up though for a second. You're going like, yes, this is a he's already all fucked up and all that, but like, there were numerous points in the first 2 where you're being very supportive and going like, a normal person would look at this and go, oh, you're going to get your fucking ass killed. I'm not going to support this. Now, obviously he's got the fucked up knee and all that. So at that point, you're really like, look, you really are going to get yourself killed. You got lucky in the past that didn't already happen. So I would be kind of curious as to what his first year and a half or so was like. Like, was he going out every night at this level and fucking up like gangbangers like he does? Because I love that scene, even though I wish we didn't kind of see the best parts of it in the trailers. But if he'd just kind of been spending the first year or so doing that maybe a couple times a week, and maybe just more of doing detective stuff for the police, where Alfred could be like, okay, this is probably a bad idea, but he's doing whatever. Or if now it's like, oh, he's staying out all night now and he's doing stuff that he did like once a week, multiple times a night. Now he's really putting himself in a position where like, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're, coming back here more and more bruised every night. But we don't know that. But in my brain, I can sit there and go like, oh, he's getting worse. An Alfred character should be stepping in day one, essentially saying like, this is a terrible idea. You shouldn't be doing this. So I'd be curious to see what he'd been doing before that. So I can kind of in my brain, as long as they don't tell me otherwise, go like, oh, he's stepping it up too much.
Yeah, he's finally hit bottom.
Yeah.
Or I mean, this is as close to bottom as he's been yet, and he doesn't want to see it get worse. I can get that, but they didn't develop on that. To me, the dialogue sounded like this is a day one conversation.
And like all this stuff, if this is the tone they continue into the sequel, I'm going to be very let down. But if this is, the story of like, he's already Batman, which thank God we're not doing the, origin or whatever.
Yeah.
But we're seeing him work out the kinks and what he has to be doing. Because like one of my other big qualms with it is how is he as Bruce Wayne? Because we don't really get a whole lot of Bruce Wayne in this movie. It's, mostly him as Batman. And if in the next movie, he's still got the emo haircut and he's, all depressed and shitty to Alfred and everybody else, it's like, okay, then I'm going to look at it and go like, you don't have a better idea here. But if this movie was him, and I think it is based on how he, learns from helping those people at the end of the movie, that I want to see his Bruce Wayne. I want to see him doing the Playboy thing. I want to see him, lighten up a little bit more with Alfred, who he really does treat like a piece of shit through a lot of this movie. And if he kind of is grown from the stuff that I also kind of wasn't super big on in this movie, it'll make me like this stuff a lot more. As far as like, oh, this movie was the first act of that story of him being Batman, and he learned better, and he's out there and he's, in public being a bit of a rich doofus. So people don't suspect him. He's got a better haircut and all that. Then I'm going to look at this a lot better. But if in the next one, he's still walking around at that same level, I'm going to look at it and go, okay, this is all you guys got. The character didn't learn anything at all from the first one.
The thing is that he's being very careless in this movie because he acts exactly the same as Batman. And Christian Bale, he was that billionaire playboy. That's no way that's Batman type of thing, even though Batman appears when Bruce Wayne suddenly returns after 7 years. But other than that, I mean, his true mask was Bruce Wayne. And he's like exactly the same character throughout, which really bugged me because I feel like something like that could slip. I mean, even Catwoman said, you must be someone who's wealthy or something like that. So it's like, and the other thing I didn't like is that he looks like Robert Pattinson. Like at least Michael Keaton and Christian Bale, like in the Batsuit, they could kind of be anyone. Like it's a true disguise. Even Val Kilmer could have been anyone, but George Clooney and Robert Pattinson, like they like look like themselves. It's not a disguise.
I think his disguise is more the fact that he's a recluse you never see. You know what I mean? Where like if
he's a public figure, and they already established that in the commissioner's funeral.
He is, but even then, Alfred's going like, "Oh my God, you're leaving the house." He's like, "Oh yeah, it's the commissioner's funeral. I have to make an appearance. Plus, I get to recon some stuff at the funeral. Maybe I'll get a clue there." They very much treated him like he's not being seen. Like because even when he shows up, like, "Oh my God, that's Bruce Wayne." Like, wow, this is a really important function here. Where I think if he were more of an Elon Musk character, like, yeah, maybe it would be a little more obvious of going like, oh, that's just Elon Musk in a fucking mask.
So let's see if they actually have the guts to pull Robin off. I feel like a lot of these people who reinvent Batman for the better, Christopher Nolan, Tim Burton, they do something great for Batman, but then they always diss Robin. I've never been opposed to Robin. I mean, I feel like because Robin is, for the most part, a kid, it's irresponsible for Batman to have him as a sidekick. I get that. But I think, a lot of these great directors and writers, they should probably put on their thinking cap and try and incorporate him in some form or another, because he is a big part of the comics. He's a big part of what made Batman popular, as many people like to deny. But the Adam West Batman, that is what made Batman popular. And they would have no reason to make a Batman movie if it wasn't for Adam West's Batman and its popularity. As different as Batman 89 is from it, it exists because of it.
We've been doing Batman 89, with the exception of Chris O'Donnell.
Yeah.
We've been doing that same thing, though, this whole time. But like the really difficult thing of doing Robin in live action is he's typically, like you said, like a child, which instantly is going to put a lot of the audience off. I feel it's funny in the first Kick-Ass because like the kids swearing in that movie's like super over the top and, you know, whatever. But you stop and go like, oh my God, there's like a kid like murdering people. Like, this is insane. Where if you're treating it more seriously, you're going like, this crazy son of a bitch is taking like a 12-year-old out to fight with him. Like, he's only there to like get shot at instead of you, I would suppose. Versus the Chris O'Donnell problem, which is like, this dude's a fucking adult. Like he can go out and make his own way. And like, I understand going like, look, I feel bad for this guy who just lost his parents. Maybe I'll give him some cash to put him through college or whatever. But like, he's not an orphan, you know? So to me, I'd look at it and go like, if you are going to do Robin, you have to have a very tight, you know, line you got to stick to of like I forget, do you watch Cobra Kai? Okay. So like, I'm picturing in my head something like Miguel season 1 where you're looking at it's going like, hey, this actor's probably like 19, but I believe that he could be like 16. If him and Johnny get in a fight, I'm not going to be like, oh, Johnny Lawrence is beating up a child.
I think there's a way you can get away with it and make it realistic and make Batman still like look like a responsible adult. And that is, you know, Dick Grayson is also an orphan. And don't the Waynes have an orphanage that they fund?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, just have him as one of the orphans there. He finds out Bruce's secret. He follows Batman out and he basically manipulates Batman. He blackmails him to say, I'll tell everyone you're Bruce Wayne unless, you know, you let me come along with you, or I'm going to come along with you whether or not you like it. And it's kind of like Batman doesn't want it to happen, but in order for Bruce Wayne to stay Batman, he has to protect someone while also fighting crime. But then, you know, there might be a little bit of a twist, like Robin actually is the one that ends up protecting Batman, saving him from something unexpected or something like that. And we can get that to work. And that's just like a one movie thing. Yeah. I mean, I just don't feel like Batman's really a series that you need to come out with every year. Like give it 3 years between movies. I feel like that's fair. Good. And so, yeah, you introduce him when he's like, you know, 14, and then in the next movie, you know, he's 17, and you're past that, you know, he's close to being Nightwing at that point, probably.
That's the thing where I really get kind of pissed off about with the whole attempt at what they were doing with the DCEU of like, I didn't like the idea of starting off a Batman at the end of his story the way, you know, BVS kind of does. We were like, oh, this guy's going to die in like a year or two. Most of his great adventures are in his past, and he's just now like finding out about like Wonder Woman and Superman. I did, though, like the idea of going like, okay, but instead of having like a 40-something Batman, let's have a 30-something Batman who's been doing this for 10 years. And we do have Robin and Batgirl and Nightwing and all that, but like not so far into the future where it's like, oh yeah, they're all dead. Like they've all been killed, and you didn't get to see any of that, which is the one thing I kind of think that you are going to have to do to make Batman fresh. And I don't know if this is the series to do it in, of going like, we're going to have to just do the Bat family idea and just accept that people understand where Robin came from. I mean, you know, Nightwing, I should say. Barbara is not, you know, day one Batgirl. And we're just going to jump in and go like, no, they've all been doing this for at least 5 years, you know, and Bruce has been doing it for probably 10. And we established that they've already met the Joker and the Riddler. And if Bane is your villain in this movie, they've encountered Bane 3 times in the past. That's the way I kind of want to see this get done. But I don't know if we're ever actually going to see that. I feel that the DCEU had their shot at that, fumbled it so bad. And it's like, well, we're just not going to get that now. We're going to get more of Batman on his own.
Yeah, I don't think there's a mass appeal to do it that way, because it's not as common knowledge how the Bat family formed than it is Batman's origin story, or even to a lesser extent Robin's origin story, or even Batgirl's origin story. I feel like those 3 you could probably get away with, but Nightwing actually being Dick Grayson, the death of
Jason Todd. I feel that people know enough about Batman himself of like, I understand where if you want to tell an Avengers movie and you essentially had at the time were kind of your, you know, your B-list roster, you didn't have your Wolverines or Spider-Mans or anything like that. So you're like, okay, we're going to have to do solo movies so grandma knows who Thor is. Where I feel that because we already know who Batman is and everybody has a general idea of who Robin is, and I think they, to an extent, have a general-ish idea of who Batgirl is. I look Alfred's at it kind niece. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. With no British accent, who's been in England this whole time. I look at it and I just feel if you don't get too, like, I'm not saying you throw Batwoman in there. I'm not saying you throw Red Hood or anything like that, but just Tim Drake, Robin, or even if you want to do Jason Todd, Nightwing, Batgirl, and Batman. I figure people would understand. And I look at it kind of like you didn't need a whole bunch of explanation for like that first X-Men movie. People understood they're mutants. We really know who Wolverine is. We know who Cyclops is. We know who Storm is. We know who Jean and Professor X are. And, you know, okay, maybe when come the sequel, maybe you're not as familiar with Nightcrawler because he wasn't as really a big character in the cartoons, but they accept, okay, he's just another mutant. Here's what he can do. I wouldn't go deep into the Bat family thing, but I would like to see them, instead of establishing it over like 3 or 4 movies, because then by that time you're already kind of over, like Pattinson's probably not going to do 7 of these. Just start at that level. And then maybe by the 3rd one, you can get a little more deep cut Bat family stuff. Have Batman just start off being 35 and he's been doing it since he was like 20 something.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, I
just-
still don't feel like that's a big enough age gap to have Batgirl and Robin, though. I mean, I feel like at least Batgirl is considerably younger.
Well, yeah, but if you have him be around 35,
I think he'll have to be in his early 40s. Let's assume Jason Todd's already died. Tim Drake has taken over as Robin. I mean, they have Talia al Ghul's son is now Robin, isn't it? Or
yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of seems reasonable to have Batman in his 40s if you want an established Bat family right from the beginning of a movie. To be honest, though, that's not really the type of Batman movie I want to see. But at the same time, the Batman movie that I wanted to see, Christopher Nolan made 3 of them for the most part.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wouldn't have an issue with them making it. They already captured excellently what makes Batman so special, which is, you know, in a lot of ways, he's a real guy. You can try and make this as real world as possible. And I feel like they did that. Burton did it with Batman 89 to a far less extent, but I think the effort was there. But Nolan captured it excellently. I mean, you still have to suspend some disbelief, but it was about, you know, a real man becoming a hero.
It's exactly what we got. And it's exactly what we wanted out of the character, which is where I look at it going, now let's take a wilder swing and go for, like, you know, essentially your Batman Avengers.
Yeah, it's not my cup of tea, but I can definitely understand why that's the direction you go, because it hasn't been done before. But again, you know, they kind of backpedaled and now they're kind of just starting over again with the Batman, which is another thing that irritated me about the Batman, which is like, what is this trying to do? I mean, there's several different interpretations of Batman, and I feel like what it's really trying to do is be as close to the comic book as possible. It's trying to mesh in Nolan's realism to a little bit of an extent, but also adding that gothicness that Tim Burton had. I felt like it was a little bit of a pointless interpretation. Yeah, I feel like every other Batman interpretation, you know, it had something new to add, and this one certainly does. I mean, it's very David Fincher inspired.
I loved watching him get to actually be a detective, you know, which is something we very rarely get to watch in these movies. Like, he's not necessarily the best at it.
Right. No, he wasn't. Yeah, did not end up being, like, that's what I was looking forward to as well. Especially, I think the Riddler is a great villain for him to do that with.
Yeah.
But I was unsatisfied because he was not a very good detective. The stuff he was investigating wasn't all that interesting because we kind of already had an idea of who the Riddler is as well. We did see a little bit of that in The Dark Knight. It was small, but I mean, it was there. I feel like there was a missed opportunity with the Batman to kind of have that full-blown detective work.
Well, but like if they'd ended it though with, you know, the interrogation scene with Riddler and just like it's kind of over, it would have felt more like, okay, yeah, that was a detective story you saw where the detective missed a couple clues and it resulted in some tragedies that they probably would have been able to, you know, prevent. But then you tack on the traditional, you know, action-y ending like that. It just sort of puts all the detective stuff. It makes it feel almost like, okay, I didn't necessarily get anything accomplished through this. Like, Riddler just still ended up flooding the city, and you really kind of failed here. You were saying earlier about like the openings. Like, I love that horror movie reveal essentially of like Riddler at the beginning. And like one of the things I heard people suggest to trim the time off this, I actually came up to this one myself as well, but I saw people talking about it. Instead of that being the first murder and him watching the results of like a debate that he'd had earlier in the night, what if instead you just push the story forward and like the mayor is watching on the news that the commissioner has been killed and he's like, then he's the second victim as opposed to the first one. He could have then like kind of pushed 20 minutes out of that movie, it still would have had the same like ending problem for me, but at least it would have been like, okay, at least it was a 2 hour and 30-minute movie as opposed to almost 3 hours, which I don't have a problem with 3 hour movies. I also have a problem with a 3 hour movie that stays. I don't have a problem with a 100-minute movie that stays past its, logical conclusion than, what we had here. But I was really into the more kind of grounded, realistic action, like that scene from the first trailer where he just beats the ever-loving shit out of that guy. It's like, okay, I know he doesn't kill, but he's like probably put that guy in a coma because his head is getting pounded off the concrete.
When I went into the movie, I was like, okay, I already passed judgment on that. I'm not going to let it take me out of the movie. So, but no, I think year 2 Batman, I feel like beating the shit out of someone like that is completely irresponsible. Could have easily killed someone. He should have known it could have killed someone. In real life, odds are that guy was dead.
I guess if you try and protect his head, or maybe he was like just punching him in the stomach and we couldn't really tell. But like, yeah, like there's so much stuff of like, you do have to suspend. I mean, we're already suspending crazy disbelief as it is with any of this stuff, but I'm not saying that I know how to fight in the sense of like I can beat up any man who comes across me, but I feel safe walking down the street. But a big reason why you'd never want to get in a fight with anybody, it's always better if somebody's fucking with you and you can beat them up. You still are best to go like, yeah, that's cool, man. Yeah, I'm an asshole, whatever. Just keep walking. Because one, you don't know if somebody has a gun or a knife or whatever. I also look at it and I go, you don't want to, bust your hand and then they bleed into you and God knows what they have. And now congratulations, you got hepatitis or whatever. But one of the bigger reasons is also the fact that I don't want to just punch some rando on the street and now you're dead.
Yeah, I mean, there's that scenario. There's, the scenario of, someone getting lucky and them, knocking you to the ground or knocking you out. Yeah. And you don't know them. You don't know if they're actually going to stop, or that person could take a punch, be fine, and then they go to sleep several hours later and they don't wake
exactly.
up.
Yeah. And that's where I look at like where you really got to suspend disbelief on Batman's like no killing rule of like, he fucks some guy up and we just kind of accept in movies going like, oh, that guy's unconscious, but he'll wake up, in an hour and like he'll have a concussion and he'll be, otherwise fine. It's like, how many murders did Batman get the assist in? And not by letting the Joker live, but by, like he gave this guy severe brain damage and 2 years later, because the headaches won't stop, the guy put a gun in his mouth and killed himself.
I feel like, Nolan was silently one step ahead of everyone on that because, I mean, yes, the Tumblr, pancaked everything. How did Batman know Nolan was going to get squished? But at the same time, he targeted other ninjas that were trained to fight with him, so I feel like Nolan
they had a chance to run away.
They had a chance. They knew what they were getting into. This was true combat. That's just another added element as to why I liked Nolan's movies so much. But I didn't go in with the intent to compare the two. I respect that there's very, very many interpretations of Batman, and I try to go into Schumacher's Batman with a little bit of suspension of disbelief and willingness to try and be entertained by it. I mean, I like Batman Forever significantly more than I like Batman and Robin. I try to respect the interpretation as much as possible, and that it doesn't have to be Burton's interpretation. Schumacher did not necessarily fail. He set out to make his own interpretation of Batman.
That's very kind to say he didn't fail when Batman and Robin exists.
Well,
I see what you mean from the artistic standpoint, though.
Well, and it's not like Batman Forever failed. I mean, he made a movie that the studios wanted. He delivered what they. He then just went
too far.
I think he got rushed into Batman and Robin. I don't even think he liked Batman and Robin. At the same time, people don't talk about that. Burton may have gone a little too far and was the cause of Warner not wanting him for a third movie. I mean, Batman Returns, I would have liked to see a Batman 3 from Burton because I like Batman 89 so much. I think we forget that Batman 3 from Burton would not have been all that magical. And you can just look at Batman Returns and how much he wanted to distance himself from Batman 89. Comparing the two, it's just a night and day difference to me. I think there's a huge gap in quality between 89 and Returns. And I think a big part of it is that Burton distanced himself so much from 89. I don't even know why he decided to come back for a second movie. Because the mayor's different, the Gotham City, just the look of it's completely different. The bat suit's way different. There's nothing gothic or gritty about Batman Returns. It's all polished and shiny. The only nastiness is the Penguin himself. So
I do love Returns, but they do feel like not made by the same guy. Let's run down overall what we thought of like casting. Pattinson, where do we stand on him?
With Pattinson, like I knew to keep an open mind, and my issue with Robert Pattinson was what I had already said earlier, which was there was no difference between Bruce Wayne and Batman. They were the exact same character. He didn't really even bother to separate them. And then the other thing is that he's too unique looking in the sense that the Batsuit's not really a good disguise for him. So I ended up not really caring for him, to tell you the truth, for those two reasons.
I really liked his Batman, but like I said, we didn't really get a whole lot out of Bruce Wayne, which, like I said, it's one of those things of ask me again after we see the sequel.
Mm-hmm.
If he's still like this as Bruce Wayne in the next one, I'm going to look at it and go like, okay, I don't like this nearly as much. The jury's out on the Bruce Wayne. The Batman aspect of it, I think, is a pretty big thumbs up.
Do you want to move on to Zoe Kravitz?
I really thought she was great. I don't have a lot to really say, but I was the whole time going like, yeah, I'm loving everything she's doing. I thought it was smart casting. She had the physicality down.
I agree. I think she was great. She was probably my favorite interpretation of Catwoman. Far more grounded. She was really just like a burglar. She didn't really have anything too fancy. I mean, she had tools to open a safe and all of that, but I mean, It was her mask was just a typical ski mask. And I also liked how she wasn't really a competition for Batman. Like, she could not defend herself against Batman. There was none of this back and forth ridiculous fighting between the two, like in Batman Returns and all of that. It's like, you basically are wearing armor, Batman. Why are you not taking this woman down? And in this movie, I mean, she tries to go at him, and he just kind of, I think he pins her against the table or was it the wall or something like that.
Yeah.
They get it out of the way very early on. I think it's their first scene together. So I think it really grounded her, made her realistic when she does go at it with, I think a couple of the mobsters and stuff, far more grounded. So I really liked her.
She's probably my favorite part of the movie now that I think about it.
What do you think of Paul Dano?
I loved Paul Dano. He is a terrifying individual in general. Like, there's just something very creepy about him. He's one of those guys that I feel that if you knew him and, you came home one day and there's a bunch of news vans outside and it's just like, turns out your neighbor, did a fucking room and had like this girl in his basement. Are you going to say to the newscaster, whoever could have suspected this? Or are you going to say like, yeah, that makes sense. I believe that. He went more comical, I kind of felt at the end, with like the singing and like all that, but I also was going like, I don't know if he's trying to be comical, or it's not even necessarily that it was even funny. It may be just more like the uncomfortableness of it, of watching somebody just like sing at you. I love him. I think he's a great actor. I really liked what he did with the character. I liked the design of the character. Thumbs up with him throughout it. How about you?
It was kind of a mesh between There Will Be Blood and Prisoners. I feel like I've already seen him do this before.
Yeah.
When I'm so underwhelmed by something that's supposed to be so intense, it's kind of a dud for me. And it may have also worked better if Edward Nashton, the true identity, was hidden somewhere in a random Gothamite. Like, we know that, of course, Edward Nashton is the Riddler, but who exactly is Edward Nashton? Like, we don't know. So I think, there was some room for mystery that got lost. And I feel like, it's just kind of, hey, Paul, do what you did at the end of There Will Be Blood. That'll be, audiences will like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I was a fan. I'd be curious to see, are we ever going to see him again? Because they didn't kill him. And of course, the very weirdly unnecessary Joker scene, which we may as well jump into that right now as well.
I hated the Joker baiting. I mean, it's already been done.
So I knew going into it that they had tested two versions of the movie. One, they tested more than just two, but two of the versions they tested were with a scene with very
Keown. I think that's how you pronounce it.
He's a very creepy looking actor. I just thought, like, at that point, I'm going like, there's already too many endings here. Why are we getting another ending?
I know that Batman Begins, I don't think it was a sequel bait. Like, I think like they were, because reboots had been so new at the time that it was almost like a nod to Jack Nicholson and Tim Burton. It's like, hey, we're not trying to outdo you, but we're restarting the story, and it's to no offense to you. It was also a nod to Batman Year One, where Gordon references the Joker at the very end. So I feel like it was necessary in Batman Begins, tones, but here it just kind of felt like a copycat. And the actor, have you ever seen Killing of a Sacred Deer?
No.
Yeah, so he's in that. He plays a psycho in that. He's pretty good, but what I fear is the same thing I fear with Paul Dano is that you're basically just playing the same psychopath I saw you playing in another movie. I agree with you. He's a great actor, but I guess you could consider it a form of typecast. Their range pretty much gets narrowed the more they take on these types of roles.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I didn't really like the riddle either that he told.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was kind of silly as well. Then we got Jeffrey Wright as Gordon. What'd you think there?
Loved him.
Yeah,
I thought he was the best part of the movie. I know you said Zoe Kravitz, and I like Zoe Kravitz a lot, but Jeffrey Wright was just terrific.
He was for sure way up there. Next to Pattinson as Batman himself, he's probably like 2B.
Just his style alone. Also, what I really liked is that he is like Batman's sidekick in this.
Yes, very much. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I really liked the amount we saw Gordon. I really liked how involved he was. I really liked how basically he interacted with Batman. Like Batman was more of his teammate than his peers were.
He was basically our Robin.
I kind of felt like that. I think it worked really well. So
yeah, I loved it. That's a big part of what I really liked about all those investigating scenes of just watching the two of them interact. He seemed more friendly to him than he did to Alfred. So what'd you think of Colin Farrell as the Penguin?
I felt he was unnecessary. I don't know why they felt the need to go through all of that effort to disguise him like that. I mean, Danny DeVito kind of, fit that profile. So I don't know why they, dolled Colin Farrell up like that. I also don't know how I feel about Penguin in a more realistic and darker Batman universe. I think Burton made it work, but he kind of had that spin on it. I don't know. I feel like the Penguin should be a guy that has umbrellas for weapons and it's very comical. And if you're just going to have some mobster who's ugly, why not just introduce some of the others, like Falcone Jr. or actually include Sal Maroni. I just didn't find his character necessary. I have no interest in watching whatever HBO is planning on doing with the character. That's another thing that just bloated the movie unnecessarily. And I feel like if they just gave that role to Falcone's son or they gave it to Sal Maroni, they wouldn't have felt the need to linger on that character so much. But because this is the Penguin, I think they gave him even more screen time than they needed to.
I liked the performance. I hear what you're saying of it's so unfair to unattractive actors. We can get attractive people and we can ugly them the fuck up and they can take the parts from these actors who you can't make look like Brad Pitt. But I liked the performance. We had a weird James Gandolfini meets Robert De Niro. I liked him. I'm interested to see what they do with him going forward. I agree that it's probably a bit unnecessary, but I also would look and go, if I was writing this and the studio was going, can you put a famous mobster in here instead? Obviously Penguin would be the one you'd go for because I love what DeVito does in that movie, but I probably wouldn't be doing he's a mutant. I'd just be no, he's just a regular ugly looking guy who people call him Penguin. So that leaves us then with just...
Alfred, did you also want to do John Turturro as Carmine?
Oh, yeah. I love John Turturro. You read my copy of Long Halloween, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Long Halloween's my favorite Batman book, which is funny because this and The Dark Knight are both the Long Halloween, just with different, that explores the Harvey Dent thing more. This explores the serial killing thing more, but they're both clearly the Long Halloween.
It is kind of weird, though, that this movie takes inspiration from Long Halloween, which was very Harvey Dent focused. There's really nothing about Harvey Dent in this movie.
No mention of the whole thing.
I mean, it's really all about Harvey Dent, and it's just kind of weird that Harvey Dent's nowhere to be seen in this movie. I mean, we get every other character for the most part. We get the other big four: Joker, Catwoman, Penguin, and Riddler, but not even Harvey Dent. And it's based off of a book that's really about Harvey Dent. Anyway, so John Turturro, like you said, he has this snicker about him that's always antagonizing, and it really worked for this role. The only other thing I have to compare it to is Tom Wilkinson's Carmine Falcone in Batman Begins, which I also thought was fine. Two completely different characters, similar background, but they're just portrayed completely different. I don't think Falcone needs to be a character that's really at the forefront. He's kind of the foundation of what's wrong with Gotham, and leaving him like that is sufficient enough. So I was very happy with the amount that we got from him, or lack of amount, I should say. I felt like it worked for what they were doing. So happy about that as well. As for Alfred, Andy Serkis, I was really excited to see him because I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. So I have the utmost respect for Andy Serkis. From the first scene, I was just immediately disappointed. I already talked about, just some of the dialogue. They really tried to go for this father figure when it really ended up feeling like more of a big brother figure to Bruce Wayne. And on top of it, it's just every scene, it just doesn't work with him. And I remember the scene in the hospital where he basically tells Bruce that, no, your father did not hire Falcone. And Bruce is like, ooh, a mobster lied to me. It's just, but it kind of just, it takes away like how excellent and brave that movie would have been if what Falcone told Bruce would have been true. Like, what happens if Thomas Wayne actually hired the like, it just kind of turns Batman's whole purpose 180 degrees.
It does, but at that point, I almost think it breaks him to a point where he gives up because his parents drive everything that he does. And like, yeah, you can still love your parents if they do something fucked up, but I feel that he would have an attitude at that point of like, well, he made that bed, and it cost, and it cost him. It was still traumatizing for me to see, and I wish it didn't happen, but he's not an innocent in this situation.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, that would be Batman's biggest conflict, bigger than any of the Rogue Gallery. And they kind of teased that and they took it away. And I feel like it was kind of a cop-out because it was so easy it's just a mobster. He's lying to you. And of course, it's Andy Serkis's character who's just blundering the whole movie that kind of takes that away from me. So I was left very, very, very disappointed with Alfred.
Andy Serkis, to me, I like him as an actor, but I don't know. He has this look about him, where like Michael Caine to me just looks like that fatherly old Englishman, type guy, as did Michael Gough. Even I guess to a lesser extent, Jeremy Irons. Even I feel like Jeremy Irons is probably closer to what I would think of like this version of Alfred they may want to do of like, oh, I taught him how to fight. Part of me wants to say that I feel he got the short end of the stick, both material wise and like screen time wise. Andy Serkis kind of isn't delivering to the level that I felt everybody else was, but it may not have been his fault, or it may have just been like he's a weird choice for the role. Mm-hmm. So to me, I just look and go like, it's probably not him that's the reason for this, or even the movie itself could just be he's just miscast. But yeah, to me, if I'm looking at the entire cast, he's the one that I'd probably look at and go, if one of them has to be Katie Holmes for the sequel and we get a better person coming in to play the role, he'd be the one that I would lose the least amount of sleep over.
Yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, like Alfred was my least favorite thing about it, but I'm not sure if it was the result of Circus or the material he was given. I have nothing wrong with the amount of screen time he got, because this was more about being on an adventure with Batman. I mean, we basically follow Batman as Batman for the most part of the movie. So Alfred being absent is just fine with me, but
Gordon filled a lot of that role.
Oh yeah, that was to the movie's benefit. Do you want to wrap this up with where it ranks amongst your Batman favorites?
Well, I had just rewatched all the Nolan movies, and my attitude on those has changed a little bit from the case of Dark Knight, still number one. Love that movie. I'm stunned that I can still watch it and not get bored with it based on how many times I've seen it over the years. When I rewatched Begins, I really thought the back half of that movie wasn't as good as the front half. Like the whole, like, oh, we're going to poison the water. It's like, oh, okay. I was much more interested in like his journey on becoming Batman than I was the big action set. Kind of like in this movie, actually. The big action set piece just sort of didn't work for me. Rises, I liked more than I remembered liking it on like my last rewatch of it. I very much liked Rises more than I thought I was going to, and I'd probably look at it of a case of, I used to think it was clearly Dark Knight, then Begins, then Rises. Now I kind of look at it like Dark Knight and then a coin toss between the two. They both have issues, though I did find the final act of Rises more enjoyable than I thought it would be, where I found like the final act of Begins less enjoyable than I remember it being. So to me, I look at both of those of like, I'd probably put them just under this one, quite frankly. Not super far down, but like if I'm going 4.5 out of 5 with this, that I really felt if you'd fix that ending, we could be talking about maybe not the same level of a 5 as The Dark Knight, but like a 4.75 if that were an option, like a 9.5 out of 10. I did go 4 with both Begins and Rises. God, I feel weird ranking the Burton ones because I do love those movies, but I also kind of look at it of like, they're so of their time, they're never going to be number 1, but I feel weird if I put them down at like number like 6 or something like that. It's The Dark Knight's number 1, Mask of the Phantasm's number 2, because that's a perfect version of Batman as well. As of right now, honestly, I would probably put this at number 3 just because of how I felt with the other 2 Nolan ones. With then, God, I still feel like the Nolan ones are going to round out the top 5, and then I'm going to drop down to Keaton.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so I'll give my top 5 then, because this one actually makes number 5.
Okay, so
yeah, my top 5 is going to be controversial anyway. Nolan's trilogy, I left satisfied, and I've seen all of those movies countless times. But when you watch certain movies so many times, you start to see some flaws. So there's certain movies that you end up loving several times you watch it, and then you're like, oh, okay, over time this doesn't date as well, or maybe they should have done it this way, that. And then there's other movies where it's like, I don't know what I saw, I don't know if I liked it, I don't know if I hated it, but I definitely want to see it again. And that's kind of the movies that I end up loving more and more over time, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Was Pig for me.
Yeah.
I walked out of Pig and I was like, that wasn't at all what I expected, and I'm not sure how I felt it. Then I saw it the second time, I was like, holy shit, I love that movie.
Right. And then there's movies that I enjoy, but I know that I'm probably not going to like it over time. And I feel like The Batman is one of those where I can confidently say this is the top 5 Batman movies. I was entertained and all of that, but just watching the movie in real time, there were absolutely things that I didn't enjoy, and I know I never will. So this will be nowhere near number 1 ever. But number 4 would be The Dark Knight Rises. Yeah, I just kind of feel like in terms of realism, that was probably the least realistic of them.
Good God, yes.
And I also wonder if Catwoman was the right choice for that movie. Catwoman's very difficult to do, and I trusted Nolan, and I wasn't all that satisfied. So I think that is one of the reasons that it brings it down a little bit, but I still loved it very, very much, seen it countless times.
Yeah. I found myself almost fucking crying at the end of that. Probably helped that I watched all 3 of them like back-to-back nights. But really going like, I was 90% satisfied with the way that whole thing ended.
Yeah. So I think The Dark Knight Rises is great. I don't think it's excellent, but yeah, the emotion is there. It's well done.
I'd probably put Begins at 5 and Rises at 4.
Yeah. So Rises at 4 for me. So then number 3, my top 3 Batmans, are all excellent. I've loved Batman as far back as I can remember.
Favorite fictional character out of anything.
And I was introduced to Batman via Adam West. So this was even before 1989. So, I think Batman's just kind of always been there for me. So my top 3, just absolutely love all of them. But this is where it gets really controversial. I'm going to put The Dark Knight at number 3. The reason being is I feel like the bit players of the movie are just terrible acting. I'm specifically talking about the ferry scene, as well as when the media is hounding Harvey Dent and Harvey's taken in as the Batman. Felt like that was terrible acting. And the whole Gordon assassinated fake out, I thought was...
I hate how they gave that away in the trailer by having other scenes he's in.
That also made it worse. But how did he get everyone to play along that he died? Or if he didn't, how was he able to disguise that? Left too many questions for something so unnecessary. So there were things that I took away from that movie that I just... The
ferry scene to me is like, along with the whole like sonar, the hostages are cops. Yeah. I don't dislike any of that stuff necessarily, but I definitely do go like, okay, this is the part where the movie is no longer as good as the rest of the movie's been. But then it picks itself back up to the final thing with Harvey. But like, yeah, there's definitely a part of that movie where I go like, okay, you've been going at a 10 here the whole time. Now we're slipping a little bit.
Again, this is an excellent movie, but the reason that it makes number 3 instead of number 1, like most people, is last but not least, that final scene, while it's excellent, its exposition is based on Gordon explaining this to his son. But the ending in and of itself is excellent. It's almost, there's certain sequels that can make a tragic ending, like The Godfather 2, Empire Strikes Back, and then The Dark Knight, and even Terminator 2. There's certain movies that do a really good job of just making a sad ending. Number 2, Batman 89.
Fair. It's a great movie. Yeah, that movie for sure holds up.
Yeah, and Burton has a style it's kind of strong for my liking, but the fact that there was so much studio interference with this movie, I think it actually worked. I think it's one of the few movies where you can say the studio's interference actually did the movie a great job, because Burton did push back. You do see elements of Burton, but it's not too Burton like Batman Returns. So last but not least, Batman Begins. I remember walking in, keeping an open mind. It was everything I wanted a Batman movie to be. It was about Batman. It was about how a guy was pushed to becoming that and risking his life for that. It was almost like they explained every little thing, and I loved it a lot. And I get that it can be maybe a little too climactic for some people's taste, but I feel like it all built evenly towards it. Yeah, it's absolutely my favorite Batman.
I remember going into it midnight showing, and this was the same summer as Revenge of the Sith. And I remember how going to Revenge of the Sith was like sold out, even though people were still going like, yeah, okay, these last two weren't very good, but we're here regardless. And people were pretty happy with it because it is the best of those three. And I remember seeing Begins at a midnight showing with the friend. And I don't want to say we were the only people there, but if there were more than a dozen people there, I would have been stunned. So yeah, you definitely kind of went in with this idea of going, you didn't have this high expectation for Batman on film at that point. Mm-hmm. Just kind of going like, okay, we'll see what they do. And I do very much remember walking out of it being like, holy shit, like they really did a fucking great Batman movie. Holy fuck. And I remember how I didn't really think about it a whole lot after it came out, but I didn't watch it in its entirety again until like a month or two before The Dark Knight came out. So I'd only seen it maybe once or twice in theaters, then like bits and pieces here and there, and then like never again for what was it, 3 years. And yeah, I remember being blown away how well it held up on that follow-up viewing. But yeah, this most recent one, I'm watching it. I'm loving all of the backstory and going like, yeah, the origins being done perfectly. Never need to do this again. And it just takes a turn at that ending for me, where like I said, the whole big action set piece, kind of like in the Batman. And just kind of going like, oh, I was much more interested in the more kind of personal aspect here. And then once it gets all, destruction-y, like I start to just sort of zone out. And it corrects itself by the end, where I'm still invested. It doesn't completely make me want to totally stop watching it. The first 2/3, I could really see the argument of like, yeah, that could easily be my number 2. But yeah, then when the rest of it happens, that's where it kind of put me going like, I think I kind of like Rises a little more than this. But even then, we're talking about, if I had to really break it down, we're looking at like, they're both 4 stars. I gave them, and one is like just a fraction, a little bit more enjoyable. But yeah, everything in the first 2/3 of that movie, like I was going to go like, holy shit, this holds up.
Oh, song I